It's Spooktober, everyone, so let's get back into the horror game spirit. Yeah, survival horror has come a long way over the years. Of course, depending on how exactly you define survival horror. You can trace it back to Resident Evil, Alone in the Dark, Sweet Home, which actually inspired Resident Evil. Or maybe even further back to like Friday the 13th the game. No, not that one. Or even back to games like 3D Monster Maze or Haunted House. While some like to throw in games like Castlevania or Monster Bash into the mix with survival horror, I don't really consider those actual survival horror games. They just have horror themes, like Dankula or Frankenstein. Clock Tower. Yes, this is a series I discovered many years ago and was impressed with how different it was from the same kind of games around the time. I mean, it was released in 1995, the same year games like Rondo of Blood. And for being released on the SNES, it's impressive what they were able to accomplish. The game follows Jennifer Connelly, an orphan who is from the Granite Orphanage in Norway. She and 3 other orphans were adopted by some businessman named Simon Barrows, who lives in some mansion near the clock tower. You know, because that's the name. It's the name of it. It's the name of the thing. The game plays on the fear of being helpless. In Clock Tower, unlike many other games at the time, the player can't really fight back. You can struggle, but really the only way to defeat an enemy is to solve a puzzle, which are throughout the game. Oh, and the enemies? Creepy as shit. I mean, first there's Mary, some old woman who wants you and your orphan friends dead. And yeah, she does kill some. In certain routes, anyway. Routes. Is it, you know if it's route or route? I don't. You see, the game actually had several different paths events can happen, and 7 endings depending on these paths, which for a SNES game is actually pretty cool. Then there's Dan, a grotesque monster who honestly scared the shit out of me when I was younger. I mean, look at him. He's horrifying. He'll chase you around the estate, letting out blood-curdling noises. Okay, blood-curdling for the SNES. There's also minor enemies that can give you a shiver or two throughout the house, but the real enemy the game has become infamously known for is Bobby Barrows or the Scissor Man. Yes, while the other 2 triplets can give you a spook or two, our boy Bobby takes it to a level. He essentially stalks you throughout the entire mansion as you try to find your orphan friends, and he can be anywhere at any time. This is a great mechanic, and a pretty new one for the time, where there's always a chance he'll be right next to you, just waiting to strike. And this effect is multiplied by the fact that there aren't as many saves as in most games. In fact, it can almost be as scary to have to go back and redo something with all the items in different places than to actually be killed. So even the mechanics are up to spook ya. And you couldn't fight back. For games at this time, and certainly on this console, not being able to fight back was very new. I mean, this meant you had to hide or place traps around in order to get away from enemies, and some of these hiding places were pretty cinematic, making you tense up as Bobby Boy searched. The game also introduced some interesting mechanics. For example, items changed with each playthrough, so every time you played it, things would be different. This made it interesting to replay, as it could lead to new scares you might not have encountered during your first playthrough. You also had to use Jennifer's face to see how her state was. I mean, the more tired she looked, the less stamina she had. It sounds unintuitive, sure, but it made it so that there was no clear stamina meter, meaning that when you ran out wasn't crystal clear. And this added to the tension during panic mode, not knowing when you'd be reduced to a tired state and become vulnerable. Oh, and panic mode, that was when Jennifer was in a panic state, like when she was being attacked or chased. It caused her to trip, slow down, panic. Like what would really happen if some deranged and disfigured kid in a 1960s English schoolboy uniform attacked you with a pair of hedge clippers. What's that? You don't think you'd be freaked out by that? I'd be freaked out of my mind. I'd be screaming, "Oh God, help me! Freddy's young British cousin is chasing me. Find me curtains." But do you get it? Okay. Now, I won't spoil the ending, but the climax is actually pretty good. There's explosions, incineration, people get shot, birds attack people. It's quite the experience. And just like that, it ends and everything is back to normal. Except for all the dead people, a destroyed manor, and the psychological scars this event will no doubt have upon the survivors. But other than that, nothing has changed. Game-wise, the graphics and sounds were good for the SNES, and overall, the tone was chilling to say the least. I mean, for the console and how early it was in the survival horror genre, it was impressive. That's not to say the game was perfect, however. It was still a point and click on the SNES, and those kinds of games can suffer from having to use a controller. Some of the puzzles weren't always the most intuitive either. The panic mechanics could be a little frustrating, and it was definitely a fairly slow game. Though that one's not necessarily a negative, that just sort of depends on the person. And right after Clock Tower, that's when the survival horror genre exploded, many saying it started with Resident Evil, though it's likely Clock Tower had a big role in some way. Regardless, the same year as Resident Evil's release, Clock Tower 2 came out. Although this is likely the one most people played first and know it as just Clock Tower. Me included for quite a while. And that's because it was the first one released in North America, whereas in Japan, this one was called Clock Tower 2. You know, it's like the Final Fantasy naming thing again, the whole, and then 3, and then just watch AVGen's vid. I think he did it away. Anyway, Clock Tower 2 released for the PlayStation and made some significant improvements, at least gameplay-wise. While there's still panic mode and it's still a point-and-click adventure, there were marked improvements, in large part because of the PlayStation's capabilities as compared to the SNES's. The 3D graphics were quite impressive for 1996, I'd say even outshining Resident Evil's. And the Scissorman was back, and this time he was the headline enemy, not just part of some trio. See, there he is right there, right on the front cover. This time, he looks much more like a normal dude, not so much a grotesque middle schooler with a homicidal rage. Really, Scissorman 1.0? It's basically me. It's just me, it's just shorter, better looking. It's me. You play as multiple characters this time, uncovering more chilling details of the Barrows family, and trying desperately to find a way to destroy the Scissorman once and for all. He's now more of a presence, a monster you must defeat, rather than just one of the enemies to watch out for, and that works great. He was genuinely the scariest part of the first game, at least for me. The game followed a bit of a weird format too. I mean, there were two main characters, each with their own path you could choose to be throughout the game, but it determined which character would be the protagonist from the prologue. And each protagonist had 5 different endings, and again, the game had many paths that would change, making it interesting to replay it and find new things. There were also 2 kinds of phases during the game. There was the regular gameplay where you'd have to watch out for Bobby Boy. And there was this kind of chill phase, or at least that's what I call it. The Scissorman wouldn't come after you in this phase, and you could just kind of explore and talk to people. It made for a nice break in between the scary parts. And again, there were some flaws as well. I mean, the game was still slow, as many point-and-clicks are. And the story was a little bit strange, which may be the case that maybe a sequel wasn't actually planned, but now they made one. Overall, though, the game sold well and was more of a smaller success. It seemed that perhaps the Scissorman was here to stay. But where's the Clock Tower in this one? Why'd they cut him from the game? I think we all know that the sexual misconduct allegations were why he was cut from the game. That's when Clock Tower 2: The Struggle Within came out. And it was a struggle within, alright. A struggle within the dev team to figure out how not to make a bad Clock Tower. That was not fair. They tried hard with this one. And just so we're clear, I much prefer the Japanese title of this game, Clock Tower Ghost Head. Ghost Head. Sounds like the worst DC villain. Batman fights Ghost Head. Whatever. Now, Ghost Head was quite different than its predecessors. And that's okay. It's great to try new things and innovate. After all, stagnation will kill a series. Or apparently it'll make it extremely successful too. So what do I know? Apparently I'm just an idiot. But Ghost Head was too convoluted, and the main character, no longer Jennifer from the first 2 games, was now Alyssa Hale, a 17-year-old in Osaka, or California, depending on which continent you live on. She has a split personality, sharing her body with another soul of a man named Mr. Bates. Do you think, Nah, it's probably not. This meant that the player had to switch between personalities to solve different puzzles or to get through different parts of the game. Alyssa could hide and escape, for example, while Mr. Bates could use weapons, including a shotgun and a pistol. Yeah, now we're talking. None of this helpless shit anymore. Blow the damn Scissorman's face off, like like the Nicolas Cage movie. Speaking of which, where was our friend Bobby Boy this time? That's right, the staple enemy from the first two games was now nowhere to be found. Instead, there was a new villain, some guy in a Japanese demon mask. It's called an Oni mask, actually.
Shut it, you weeb.
Hey, screw you, man. Anime's the best.
Everyone has the right to enjoy whatever
shit. Yeah, so no Scissor Man. Instead, it's Demon Mask. Alright, I mean, I guess that's okay. New villains can be cool. But the rest of the story also kind of made, at least to me, made me scratch my head. I mean, if you don't want spoilers, I'd move along. But to keep it brief, Mr. Bates, the other soul trapped in her body, is her brother who suffocated underground at birth because their biological father buried them in order to stop a horrible curse from being awoken, where if a certain family has twins, a curse is put upon them. Or some shit along those lines, I don't know. And then it turns out the Demon Mask who is hunting Alyssa is actually her real father to break the curse, but not her real father who she thought was her real father that dug her up only because he hated her real father, who's now Demon Mask trying to kill her. I mean, what happened to get out of the creepy manor alive? Was that plot too simple? I kind of liked it. I don't... Well, regardless of how you feel on the story, the gameplay was okay. There wasn't anything stand out that I was like, wow, that's a nice new feature to have, and it was fairly similar to Clock Tower 2. All in all, Ghost Head was fine, I guess, but it was lacking something. And not just Scissorman, it was lacking something core that the last games had that this one didn't. With Ghost Head not being as big of a hit, I guess for Clock Tower 4, named Clock Tower 3, yeah, go figure, they decided to try something a lot different. This time, the story follows Alyssa. And we need to just stop here for a minute, because if the first two Clock Towers followed Jennifer, who was the same person, why in everything that is holy on this earth and beyond would they name this girl Alyssa, the same name as the girl from Clock Tower 2, Ghost Head, and make it someone different? That's right, this Alyssa isn't the same as this Alyssa. They look the same. This one is 17 and this one is 14, so naturally I first assumed it was a prequel, but no, there's no relation whatsoever. I guess it was kind of like Final Fantasy, how there's always a Cid, but it's not the same character every time, or something like that. I don't know. You know what? The game was disappointing. Yeah, don't like how I just came out and said it before any of the details. That's fine. I don't care. I'm going for a glass of milk. I'm dealing with this shit. I don't care. This thing's still running. This time around, this new Alyssa was part of a family of badass warrior women who travel through time to fight evil spirits. Unlike the other point-and-click style games, this one was a third-person perspective and had combat mechanics. Kinda similar to Ghost Head, but more so woven into the game. I think they did this because the previous titles were sometimes criticized for their slow pace, and so making it third-person would certainly speed it up. But it also made it a bit more non-clock towery, if that's a thing. And this is where my mind diverges into two different paths of thought. Now, the first is that I don't like this game, and I don't think it's good. There are good aspects, but overall I just don't think it's a good game, and I'll get into that in a bit. However, the other path is that I see what they were going for here. They really tried something new with Clock Tower 3, and that's something I can respect, but I just don't think a lot of these choices were the right ones. Again, the plot was very different from other Clock Tower games. In this one, you play as Alyssa, travel through time and defeat evil spirits. The game takes place in London, but bounces around times, including during World War II, the 60s, and the present, and present being 2003. The gameplay saw you avoiding enemies and solving puzzles, as there wasn't really fighting until the end of each level when you had to fight a boss, or what the game calls a subordinate. Now, the panic mode is still present, which is alright in third person too, but I found it more tense in the point-and-click games. Probably because you weren't in total control of your character, which means you could only tell them how to escape and then were helpless in actually helping them do it. But the game drops the ball mostly with the mechanics of the gameplay. While the story was a lot more convoluted, it was at least okay. There was some good writing in there, especially the World War II part, and the cutscenes stuck out to me. But the mechanics were dull. I mean, there was a lot of just hiding, waiting, nothing really new came up. And it suffered from some frustrating bullshit where it wasn't your fault that you got caught, but you still did. Yeah, we've all had that experience with some game somewhere. Or maybe I'm just bad. My shittiness aside, other than that, and that the bosses were all really similar, there was no diversity. I mean, everyone knows at least to make the damn boss battles different each time. That's just common sense. But by all accounts, the game wasn't terrible. It just wasn't Clock Tower. And I think that's the whole thing. Clock Tower 3 really wasn't a Clock Tower game. In fact, I think having the Clock Tower name hampered it. Since they'd moved on from the whole point-and-click style, I can see they wanted to incorporate more action. Kind of like Silent Hill or Resident Evil, which were being released at a similar time and were very successful. But Clock Tower didn't fully embrace the switch. They still tried to stick to the point-and-click hide-and-evade style of gameplay. I think had they been given a fresh slate of a new game, they might have changed up the gameplay, and with the decent story, they could have had some good, even great gameplay accompany the story. Then, maybe we would be looking at a good game. It might not have been great, but it probably would have been better than this. And just to cement the point, I can't really recommend this game to someone looking to play a fun game, and I can't really recommend this game to Clock Tower fans, as it's not really a Clock Tower game, even though it is. So it's lost in a point between somewhere where both sides are disappointed. But hey, at least they brought the Scissor Man back and added in a Scissor Woman. They're more of a fun kind of scissor people now, with circus motif. Clown Scissorman. That's pretty scary, actually. I wouldn't want to. That's true horror. And that's Clock Tower, a series now 15 years from its last installment, with absolutely no chances of it being rebooted. But it was certainly a pioneer of the survival horror genre, and hey, maybe this Halloween it's exactly the type of thing you're looking to try. So I do recommend it. Grab a beer, grab some friends, and sit down for a run through Clock Tower. Or you might even try its spiritual successor, Nightcry. In fact, just this year it came to PS Vita, and it's available on Steam. But I would say only pick it up if you're a Clock Tower fan or are intrigued by it, because it has its own problems. Even so, I enjoyed it for what it was. And remember, kids, if you're gonna be adopted by a wealthy millionaire living in a castle on a private estate, yeah, still go for it. I mean, what are the chances the house will be haunted by Scissorman? What? I'm genuinely asking. I was just adopted. I'm a little nervous.